Hey guys, Ben Nash from Pivot Wealth here, and today I'm talking all about how to make more money from your employer share plan. This is my first time streaming this bad boy to YouTube Live. So for anyone that's following along, if you're able to just maybe drop a comment in the comments tab there, just so I can make sure that this is all working okay. In the meantime, just while I get that confirmed. Oh yeah, I can see that's coming through. Okay. Oh yeah, here we go. That's a bit of feedback. Great. So today I'm going to be talking all about how to make more money from your employer share plan, where some of the things that you need to know to really nail it and get the most out of the opportunity that is created by the fact that there's share plans, employee share plans, RSUs, ESOPs, all of these things that can help you to get ahead, but they can be really confusing and overwhelming. And there's a lot of common mistakes that people make that mean that they're just not really taking advantage of the opportunity that exists. So I'm going to unpack some of the key things that you need to be aware of, the things to know, some of the hacks and the mistakes to avoid, as well as going into the actual granular detail of the different plans that exist, ESPP, RSUs, ESOPs, all of that sort of stuff, so that you understand them and know what to look for in this space. So guys, look, before I rush into the content, please don't run out and make any life-changing decisions off the back of the content that we cover today. Would strongly recommend you seek out personalized advice before doing it. A ton of money to be made, so it makes sense to be doing that for you guys as well. So look, I think when it comes to this stuff, whether you're thinking about your money more broadly or employee share plans generally, or any of these things, that everyone's situation is unique, but there are some really common challenges that people face when it comes to their money. And these are the three that I've got here, that people really suffering from information overload, where there's too much information, too many options, and it's like you're sort of drinking from the fire hose. You don't know who to listen to or who to trust. The second is that people really struggle to find the balance between getting ahead financially at the rate that they want while they live the lifestyle that they want. So struggling to find that balance. And then you've got the fear of missing out, which is really common, so much psychology that sits around how we make our money decisions and some of the things that we do. And then you've got the fear of fucking it up, basically, the fear of making a mistake, that don't want to do the wrong thing, be that person that does a dumb thing and end up costing yourself a bunch of money. So what that leads people to is to get what I call stuck. And it's stuck, not always stuck doing nothing, but often you end up stuck just doing the same thing that you've been doing in the past, and you're actually missing opportunities to be getting better results, to be getting more out of what you have now. So I've found from spending a lot of time thinking about this and helping people with this stuff, that there's no one set of steps that works for everybody, but there is some key elements that every person needs to get right to be successful financially. And those are the ones that I've got here: your structure, strategy, and solutions. What this is about, like, structure is all about making it easy to save and making it easy to manage your money, as well as making it crystal clear how much money you have to work with when it comes to things like saving, investing, debt reduction, buying property, all those things that help you actually get ahead. The second that I've got there is strategy, which is all about really understanding like having clear goals and targets, but understanding the pathway that's in front of you, the different options that you can take to get you from where you are right now to the position that you want to be in financially. It might be investing, buying property, debt reduction, whatever those things are. So understanding those different trajectories so you can choose the right thing for you. And then the third one here is solutions, and that's having the right investments and product solutions to back up your strategy. So here you want to make sure that you're just getting that reliable, consistent progress over time and avoiding the chances of downsides and setbacks and those momentum killing mistakes. Now, here's the thing, right? That each of these elements alone are great, but the power of the three of them combined is so much more than any one of the individual elements. And if any one of those is missing, it ends up dragging on the others. So if you've got a good structure and a good strategy, but bad solutions, bad investments, it means that you're going to blow up your cash, right? Because you've got terrible investments that are going to lose your money. If you've got good investments and a good strategy, but no structure, or not as good a structure as you could have, it means that you're working with a leaky bucket, but it's going to be really hard for you to make decisions with confidence because you're not going to know how much money you can dedicate. Should you go buy your $2 million dream home, or do you need to settle for, the $1.5 million home instead, so that you don't end up overextended and you can still afford to live the lifestyle that you want and put the kids through private school if that's what you want, or take those epic overseas trips when ScoMo lets us out of the country again. Then the last one is, if you've got a good structure and good solutions but no strategy, it means that you're not going to have confidence because you don't know where you're headed. You're leaving money on the table. You're going to be running a suboptimal situation. So the three elements, you need to get all of them right, and the power of the three of them combined, as I say, much more than any individual element on its own. And today we'll talk a little bit about some of that. But I just want to run through some of the different stages that I see people go through with their money. And again, from thinking about this for a lot of time, that there are some key stages that people go through. It's a bit of a progression, essentially ranging from really bad to really good. And what typifies where you're at in the stages is how quickly you're getting ahead financially, your ability to live the lifestyle that you want, and how you feel about your money, what's going on. So the first stage is for people that are distressed. People in the distress stage, that's when they're making no financial progress, or it's slow, or so much slower than they would like. They're stressed out financially. They're stressed out from a mindset point of view because they don't have any money to do the stuff that they want to do. And from a lifestyle perspective, they're essentially trapped because they've got no money to pay for the things that they want or need to pay for. I've found that you can't actually get out of this distress stage without making a real commitment to your money. Money is one of these things that it doesn't just happen on its own. It is really important, but it's never really urgent. So it's easy to not focus on your money today. It's easy to not focus on your money tomorrow. And you may not notice immediate impact today or tomorrow, but do that day in and day out for weeks, months, and years. And then it's not going to come together on its own, and you start to see that impact. The next stage that people go through is a stalled stage. And for people in the stalled stage, that's where they're making some financial progress, but it's slow and slower than they would ideally like it to be. They're able to make the personal lifestyle choices that they want, but they often come at the sacrifice of living the lifestyle that they want. So make the personal choices that they want, but it comes at the sacrifice of being able to get ahead financially at the rate that you want. So you can do things, but it's that you sort of end up chasing your tail. And from a peace of mind point of view, not fully stressed out like people in the distress state, but you've got that niggling thought in the back of your mind that there's something that you're missing out on, something more that you should be doing to take advantage and be getting more out of what you have. The next stage up is comfortable, and that's in the comfortable stage. You're starting to build some really good momentum financially now, building a confidence as well from a peace of mind point of view, and finding a good balance between getting ahead with your money and being able to live the lifestyle that you want as well. And then the fourth stage is what I very technically coined the killing it stage, which is when, from a financial perspective, you're now starting to get some real rapid acceleration. Peace of mind point of view, completely carefree because you've got plenty of cash to do all of the things that you want with plenty left over. And from a lifestyle point of view, there's essentially no limits again because you've got loads of cash to do all of the things that you want. So it is a progression, and there's some things to do to progress between the stages. The first is to make a commitment to get from the stalled to the comfortable stage. That's where you need to take action, and you need to take that action on an ongoing basis. So there's no such thing as a set and forget money strategy these days. COVID has really highlighted that to people, that the world is changing so quickly that what makes a good decision today isn't necessarily going to make a good decision in 3 months or 6 months or even 1 month's time. So you need to take some action and do some stuff because that's what's going to drive results. But you also need to be checking in and making sure that what you want, what's going on with your money and what's going on in the world and financial markets, that they end up being consistent. So that means that your action needs to be ongoing. And then to get from the comfortable stage to the killing it stage, that's when you need to really take advantage of every opportunity that's available to you to squeeze every bit of juice out of your situation. And that's where, from an employee share plan point of view, that's one of those opportunities that you really want to be leveraging, because when you maximize all the opportunities, that's what gives you that serious momentum to build traction with your money. So for people following along, I'm not going to ask you to call it out, but yeah, if you can identify with any of the stages there, you can see that it is a progression and some clear things for you to do here. So today, what I'm going to do is break down some of the things that sit behind those broader actions so that you understand what you can do to progress through those stages. I want to share an example with you though first, to sort of frame up why this is so important. And what I've got here is essentially the power of time. And I'm going to show you an example that's got some different levels of saving and then investing into the share market average. So what I've done is I've picked the 8.7%, which is the 20-year return on the Australian share market. So when you see the news at night and it says the ASX has gone up by 1% or down by 1% or whatever that is, then that is the share market overall. There's a bunch of investments that you can use that track that market: index funds, tracker funds, that sort of stuff. So generally a very achievable number. I often get questions on whether where these numbers come from and what that means. So know that with the example, that 8.7% reasonably easy return to achieve over the longer term. We've seen markets up sort of 40% this year, to put it in some sort of context. And then I've got, so you save a chunk of money and then save on a regular basis $1,000 a month. Now, $1,000 a month, it's not nothing, but it's generally achievable for a lot of people. So, and you can see, you'll be able to see that if you're saving at a higher rate, then that result gets amplified as well. So first example that I've got here is saving. If you were to be able to save and invest $100,000 to kick off with, and then the way that the reason that I've got this in this presentation around employee share plans is that I want you to think about, you work at a tech company for a period of time. Now, most people that I speak to that work for tech firms, they generally love their job. I think you sort of need to have a pretty high degree of passion to get considered for roles in a lot of the leading technology firms. And I'm saying tech firms, but it broadly applies across other firms with employee share plans and stuff. It's just that the tech ones seem to be more dominant in the employee share plan type space. That being said, that even though the people that we talk to about this stuff, they love their jobs, they often don't want to be forced to work forever. They feel like they have to work forever. They want to have financial security so that they could walk away from their job if they choose to, or take extended leave, look after family, whatever those things are. Or they may choose to keep working, but it's a choice then, and getting to that financial freedom or financial security point is something that's a key priority. So I want you to think about, you might have a target of working for X number of years in the company that you work in and saving a certain level of wealth. And so in this example, let's imagine that you're able to put away $100,000 to kick off your investment plan. You then invest that $1,000 a month over time. So $1,000 every month, invest it, reinvest the income, all of that sort of stuff. After 10 years, you'd have about $428,000, which is pretty cool. That's a decent chunk of change. But as time goes on, you'll see that it gets bigger. So if you keep that going for another 10 years, you got $1.2 million now. 30 years, $3 million. We're seeing some really serious compounding happening, and 40 years, it's $7.4 million. Now, keep in mind that in 40 years' time, it's probably $10 for a latte at your favorite coffee shop down the road. But you can see that it's a big number. So there's a significant amount of fat in there for you to be able to draw on and use as your wealth, essentially. Now I've got a different example, which is just say, let's imagine you can get to the $200,000 mark. Now, year 10, you see that we're 1.5 times better off. And then the results extrapolate over time. We're now in 8 figures of wealth after 40 years, $4.4 million in 30 years, just saving $1,000 a month after that initial amount. Pretty significant. $300,000, well, you guys are starting to see a trend here that we've got some pretty serious bucks. And this is the opportunity that I see so many people, and they know that it's there. They know that opportunity exists. They know that they can do something, but it sometimes can see, and we'll talk about some of the mindset mistakes that people make when it comes to their employer share plans, but it can be easy to put it off for another day. And what that means is you're just failing to capitalize on the opportunity and also sabotaging your future self in terms of how much wealth and assets you can have behind you, or how quickly you can get to that point that you want. So I'm going to go through the basics. Look, I just want to call out before we get into this that this is definitely a first world problem. I'm not shying away from that. Getting buffeted with tax bills because you got tons of money in your restricted stock units that are coming through, or you made a bunch of cash from your ESOP or whatever. It is a first world problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. And for a lot of people that we talk to about this stuff, they want money not just for money's sake, but for the impact that it can have on their life and the lives of their family and community. So while it's easy to say, well, who needs all of that money? There is also an element of saying, well, the sooner you fit your oxygen mask and make sure that you're looked after, then the sooner you can start working towards that bigger impact that a lot of the people we talk to want to have. So the challenges with this stuff, if you don't get it right, you end up blindsided by tax bills, as I mentioned. You just, PAYG tax installments, end of year tax bill, sticker shock. You end up having reactive, suboptimal selling at the wrong time, selling because you've got that tax bill that you have to pay, or the quarterly installment, or this thing's due, or whatever. Not with a considered strategy, but instead just in that reactive way. And you end up with a bunch of frustration and stress because that these are good problems to have, but it's still annoying when you're not on top of them. And ultimately you're running a whole heap of risk that you may not fully be aware of. The ultimate result is that you end up making slower progress to the goals that you want and not capitalizing on the opportunity that's in front of you. But when you get this stuff right, you can have a clear plan around your tax. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. Optimize your selling strategy so you know that you're doing a considered, methodical, smart approach to when you choose to sell, whether that's now or in the future or some sort of combination. You end up with clarity and confidence because you know the impact of the moves that you're making now and what that means for your future. Manage and reduce your risk, and ultimately you're accelerating how quickly you can get to that financial security and freedom point, which I think is an opportunity worth taking. So we'll talk a bit about some of the strategies and how you can plan around that. But before I do, I just want to cover off on some of the in the actual share plans themselves and how they all work. So employee share purchase plans, how these ones work is that you're generally giving up a certain proportion. It can be like a dollar figure, but it's more commonly a percentage of your income up to a certain level. So for the most common ones that I see, it might be that you can have, say 10%, you can direct 10% of your salary to your employee share purchase plan. And generally then how it works for most of them is that you end up, when you access the shares, they normally have a participation period, which goes for 12 months. There's normally 2 periods throughout the year. And it might be, say, the 31st of January and the 31st of July might be the start and end dates of the plan. You put away the X% of your salary over that period, and at the end date of that participation period, the shares are released to you. They're typically released at a discount to the market price, though. So it might be a 10% discount, a 15% discount. It may be sometimes the higher or lower of the starting or ending price. I know that that's a pretty common one as well. So if the share price starts the participation period at $100 and goes up to $200, they'll give you a discount, but they give it to you from the lower level. That can be quite good. The best ones give you, if it goes up and down during the period, they'll pick the lowest point in the whole period and give you a discount from that. Can be quite good because when you're getting a discount from the lowest point, the lowest point, whether it's a start or end point or the lowest point throughout the period, it doesn't matter really if the share price goes up or the share price goes down. Like if the share price goes down for the whole period, then you still get a discount from the price at the end of the period. And that means that if you sell straight away, you get an immediate uplift. Now you do have to pay some tax on that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it means that it's free money because you're always getting a discount so long as you're on top of your selling. Again, we'll talk a little bit about the strategies that sit around that. Some of the plans, just worth noting that some plans that I've seen, they have like, you can, you buy, say, $5,000 worth of shares, and then after a certain period of time, they'll match your shares for you. So it might be that you have to wait. I know that like BHP, for example, that after a 3-year period, they'll give you 2-for-1 on your shares. But with those plans, you carry a bit of risk because if the share price goes down over the period, you paid 5,000 at the start. If it's worth 1,000 at the end, then you're sort of losing out. So it's not technically as free a money as what it otherwise would be with those ones that are an immediate discount that are all fully accessible to you. Now, one thing to be aware of when it comes to employee share purchase plans is that you need to fund the cash flow of the strategy. So because they say you're able to put 10% of your salary away, if say your salary is $150,000, 10% is $15,000. So, a bit over $1,000 a month. But the 10% is the number comes from your gross salary. So your total salary before tax is what I mean. But you don't get paid salary in gross dollars because your employer withholds tax, PAYG tax, to pay off to the ATO. So if you're looking at a $150,000 salary, your salary after tax might only be something like $100,000 or $110,000 or thereabouts, meaning that you're going to have to fund that, a bit over $1,000 a month full number from your after tax pay. So it's certainly achievable with a strategy, but it is something that requires a bit of strategy depending on where what your cash flow of things actually looks like. So that's your employee share purchase plans. Restricted stock units are another fairly common one as well, where your employer will give you a tranche of stock. So it might be that they give you $20,000 worth of shares or $50,000 worth of shares or whatever that number is. And then the shares will start to what they call vest, which just means become available to you after generally a 12-month period, and then it will vest over a period of time. Some of them it might be like a 3-year period or a 4-year period even, I've seen in the past. And how that works with the companies in that case is that each year you're getting another tranche of shares. And then so the first tranche starts vesting after 3 years. So you're getting the vest from one tranche. The next year you get another lot that starts vesting after 3 years. And then when you get to like your 3rd year of employment, you would have got 3 tranches, which are all vesting over that period. And so that the amount actually ramps up for you over that period of time. And that's what they refer to as the golden handcuffs, because it is really challenging to walk away as you see that these shares are going to vest over the next few years. Makes it difficult for those switching decisions. Thankfully, the tech is a competitive space, and so some firms or a lot of firms will sometimes take over RSUs or give you a cash bonus to make up for that if you do want to change what you're doing. So they're gifted over time. The thing with RSUs, the thing that catches a lot of people out, and this is a pretty common one, is that because the shares become available to you, so let's say going back to that example, you get a $50,000 vest of shares, that you get 50 grand's worth of shares become available to you, but there's no tax withheld on that by your employer because they're just putting the shares into your share account. So what that means, like a restricted stock unit vest, it's all that the whole amount of any shares that vest that become available to you is a benefit that you've received because of your employment, and the ATO views that as assessable income. It's like if you got a $50,000 cash bonus. The difference is though that with a $50,000 cash bonus, they would have withheld a whole bunch of tax, and so at tax time your tax is going to be around about where it should be. Whereas when you get $50,000 worth of shares, because there's no withholding tax, that means that you've got 50 grand of shares, great, but you've accrued a tax liability that's equivalent to the total value of the shares that you've received times by your marginal tax rate. And so if you're making more than $120,000 a year, then your marginal tax rate's like 39% when you include Medicare levy. If you're making more than a couple of $100,000 a year, then you're into that 47% category. So really, if that's you and say you're over the 200 and you've got 50 grand's worth of shares come available to you, then you should be putting sort of 47.5% or almost $25,000 aside to cover that tax bill when it comes, and it is coming. There's unfortunately no way to avoid the tax liability, although you can maximize your deductions, and that makes it more important. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the gift and invest over time, they are considered taxable income, and there's a concentrated level of risk with RSUs in that all of your assets end up with your employer. So you got your income dependent on them, your bonus, your future income, and then potentially your investments as well. There's another slide on that, which I'll dive a little bit deeper, but they're fantastic, but it's, again, just needing to have that strategy around it. Now, employee share options plans, or ESOPs, is more common in earlier stage companies. So companies that haven't yet listed on the stock exchange, that it's an easier mechanism for them to be able to get their team and employees backed behind the success of the company. As I say, common in startups there, that they gifted to you and then they vest over a period of time. Now the difference between a share vesting and an option vesting is that when you have an option vesting, it's an option to purchase a share. So it's not actually a share. When you have a share vesting, you just get a share and then you've got the asset. Now, because when the option vests, you've only got an option to buy the asset, then the ATO doesn't consider that taxable income under the law, because it's only something that's available to you. It's not something that you've exercised. But you do need to, with an option, you need to choose to what's called exercise that option, to convert the option into a share, or to take up the option to purchase that share at the price that's there. How the tax works with ESOPs and when you exercise that option is the difference between the amount that you pay for the share and the amount that the share is worth at the time that you exercise. That amount is considered a taxable income. So if you've got an option to buy a share at $5 and it's actually worth $15, then $10, the difference between how much you pay and how much it's worth, that amount is considered the taxable income. So you do, and then you get the cost base, which is the 5% mark there. So with options, if you exercise, going back to that example, that you got an option to buy a share at $5, you exercise it at and it's worth $15, you've got a $10 assessable income. And then say the share goes up to $25, you've got a $10 capital gain there. Now, this is what catches a lot of people out, and it gets a little bit technical, but because with capital gains in Australia, if you've held an investment for longer than 12 months, you get a 50% discount on a capital gain, which means that, going back to that example, when you exercise your option for $5, the share's worth $15, you pay your income tax on the $10 that's the assessable income amount from your option. Your cost base now becomes the $15 mark. And then the share goes up to $25, you've got a $10 capital gain. When you get that 50% discount, if it's a long-term gain, the amount that you pay tax on is only $5. Now, where the strategy comes in is, think about if you were to exercise the share, you've got the option to buy at $5. If you wait until it's $25 to exercise the share price is $25 to exercise your option, this full $20 is now all assessable income, which is all taxed at your marginal tax rate, no long-term CGT discount, doesn't matter how long you've held the option. So the difference in tax outcomes can be enormous on this. In fact, we had some clients recently work for a company that IPO'd. The difference between their the tax bills, and they both had about the same amount of shares, the difference that they had was in the 7-figure sum. And that's a difference between someone knowing that what to do with that strategy and not, and having a clear plan around that. So again, there's a ton of opportunity there. It can be quite complex and confusing, but it's certainly valuable to solve that problem. See, the thing is, and that example, and my apologies in advance if I've sort of bamboozled you a little bit with a bunch of numbers around that, but it goes to show that you can only really manage the risk that you understand. If you don't know where your risk is coming from or what you should be thinking about, then it's almost impossible to manage it. It's only the way that you manage risk is to identify what the risks are, understand what risk is left over, and then you need to consider what risk is acceptable to you and what risk is unacceptable. Because risk is what makes you money. This is what a lot of people don't realize, but risk is what makes you money, in that buying shares is risky, buying property is risky. If you've got shares in a tech company, keeping them is risky, selling them has risk attached to it, doing nothing has risk attached to it as well. So you've got to figure out, and part of having a good plan is understanding what are the right risks for you, and they're the ones that you want to include in your investment strategy or your financial strategy, and then the other ones you want to avoid as much as you can. So I hope you found that helpful. In terms of the breakdown of the plans themselves, I just want to talk through some of the opportunities around employer share plans and the things that you could do with this stuff. Now, the first one is avoiding bigger bills in declining markets. And I've seen, we've had a bunch of clients in the past where the shares will vest, or something happens and the share price might be up, and then there's a period of decline, whether that's specific to the company or more across the broader markets, and you end up holding the can on the tax front if you're not consciously making these decisions. So when you get it right, you can avoid getting those bill shocks in declining markets. The paper rich trap as well, and this is something that we see a lot of people end up with all this money on paper, and especially when you've got massive tax obligations that sit underneath your investments. If you can see all these dollars on paper, then you can fall into the trap of thinking that you're richer than you actually are. And then your lifestyle sort of wants to keep up with that. And it can lead you to making some, suboptimal decisions. I'll put it that way. But you end up with all this money on paper, and especially that depending on how you're structured, the more that time goes on, the bigger those, the variance can be in terms of the tax that sits underneath your investments. And so, yeah, you run the risk of having this big pile of cash, but it's all just paper money. It's not stuff that you can use for your lifestyle, to buy a great house, to do the things that you want. And the other opportunity is just having an exit plan around your shares. Now, I think that there's a lot of psychology that sits around what we do, and clearly there's this thing called involvement bias, that we think that when we're involved in something, it has a higher chance of working out well, and not to say that it doesn't, but I think you don't want to go in there with rose-colored glasses. You want to have a sensible approach to knowing that at some point you're probably going to not be carrying it like a massive proportion of your wealth in a tech company. So what is your exit plan? Being aware of the tax and having a plan, we spoke a lot about that. I'll give you some of the tips around tax planning as well here, which is really just understanding some of those issues that I spoke through before. What is the accrued tax liability? What does that mean? How are you going to cover it? And what is the amount, and when are they due? So that you can then map it out. We've got a couple of tools that we use around this, where you're planning with the tax bills and updating those accrued liabilities as they come through, so that you know, and you can put the money aside, and you don't leave yourself overextended and end up in a position where you're having to scramble or get frustrated or say no to things, or importantly, sell investments at the wrong time. And having the money aside, like, you should, beyond having the money for your accrued tax liability aside, you want to have a good emergency fund anyway. So sometimes you need to put in a bit of work to get there, but you shouldn't end up in a position where you're needing to, find money for tax bills, because it's just, otherwise you end up trapped in your job, because you literally cannot walk away because you don't have the funds to pay for the tax that you already owe the tax man. You want to understand diversification. I'd sort of touched on it before, but when you've got your employment income, your bonus, your future salary, your future share investments, and your whole investment portfolio in one company, your risk is extremely concentrated. And I think that, tech is taking over the world at the moment, and a lot of the other companies that are outside of tech that have these great employer share plans, they're also generally doing great things. And partly driven by why they have this, that they get great people and they're motivated to drive the success of the company. But COVID and recent market movements have shown us that we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. And so when you're super concentrated with your risk, it can be stressful and scary, and you can end up in a position that you really don't want to be in. So understanding that diversification and spreading your investments in your portfolio out across different areas is something that's going to give you a lot of peace of mind. And also it'll also mean that you're taking some profits while they're there, so that you're not caught holding the bag if they're not. I'm going to talk a little bit about investments in a bit more detail here. I've got this image here, which basically just shows the timeline of different investments. And we see, markets go up, markets go down. Over the long term, the markets overall and good companies within those markets, they tend to go up. But we know that they can move around and go down quite quickly, and sometimes for prolonged periods of time. Now, COVID, we saw a sort of 40, 50% decline in the share markets at that time. That had a really sharp recovery because the government just splashing their cash all over the place to support businesses, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I think that the economy certainly got a ton of benefit out of that. Whether that's a sustainable strategy or not, in my opinion, it's not. That they have to pay the piper at some point, but I don't think that point is anytime soon. So I don't want to be a doomsday spruiker with that one. But previous to the current COVID crisis, the global financial crisis that happened in 2008 was a good example, where the markets went down that same sort of 40 or 50%, but then they hovered around there for years afterwards. Now, if you had a whole bunch of investments in pre-COVID, and then you got that whack with the markets and you held your investments, they've now recovered generally to beyond where they were prior to COVID, which is great. But if you're forced to sell your investments at the wrong time, you can see down here, like you're forced to sell them. Say you wanted to complete on a property purchase or change jobs or start a business or whatever, then that can be a really terrible move, and you end up costing yourself a whole bunch of money off the back of it. So when you invest into shares, any shares, whether that's shares in your employer or any shares that you would invest in outside of your employer, the general suggested investment timeframe is 7 to 10 years or more. The reason being is because you want to be able to have that 7 to 10 years or more to wait it out if the markets do turn south and end up low for a prolonged period of time. It's not to say that you need to hold a share investment for 7 years for it to be beneficial. In fact, if you bought shares 6 months ago and sold them today, you would be selling them at a tidy profit. You just need to have the ability to hold the shares for that 7-year period if it doesn't make sense to sell them. So I think that it's worth being aware of the fact that you don't want to get caught short, but two, understand that even moving from your shares with your employer to a diversified share portfolio, you want to know that you've got the ability with those investments to hold them for an extended period if that's what's needed. Understanding the difference between growth investments and defensive is really important as well. And you see that I've got here that, there are different types of investments that people have. You've got defensive investments like cash and bonds or fixed interest. That's like bonds, term deposits, that sort of stuff. These are defensive assets, which are stable, have much less risk of going backwards. But they're just designed to give you income. They're also called income investments, actually. And then you've got growth investments like shares, property, Australian shares, international shares, property, that they can go up and down, but you expect them to grow over time. Getting your mix right between the growth investments and the defensive investments is a really key part of getting the right investment outcomes for you. And it partly ties back to the investment timeline that I just mentioned as well. So knowing that you've got, and don't think about just your, E-Trade account or whatever. You want to think of your total asset pool between your cash that you got in your savings fund, your emergency account, any share investments that you've got, property investments and any other ones as well, and make sure that you've got the right mix of growth and defensive assets to achieve what it is that you want. Understanding good versus bad risk, and what I've got here, and this is like a comparison between, say, a tech startup company, like a smaller tech company that can be like really wild in terms of its ups and downs, or any smaller company really, compared to like a stable, bigger, could be a tech firm, but a stable one where it's backed by a lot of assets. Think of an Amazon or an Apple or something like that. Now, we know that there will be fluctuations in their share price, but we know that over time they're backed by assets, smart strategy, established proven model, that sort of stuff, that you expect them to do what good investments do over the right time frame, which is go up. Now, when people think about investing, they think about when they want to invest in a high growth way, sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that that means that you're going to invest in a lot of these speculative startup type companies and have to ride the roller coaster that comes along with it. That's not really the case. In fact, it's not the case at all. It just means that you've got you've got more of the bigger, stable blue chip companies and less of the less cash and defensive type investments. And then the last one here, and this is to my point before about diversification. Now, I'm going to compare two big stable companies here. Think of like an Amazon versus an Apple. Now, these are similar companies in similar industries, but they're also different businesses. They play in different markets to a degree. And you see that when you invest, say you got $10,000 and put half into Amazon, half into Apple, the return that you get on your portfolio now is going to be averaged out, that it'll be smoothed out by the highs of one will be balanced against the lows of another. And this is why when you've just got all of your investments in one particular company, that you're following this wild ride. So given, going back to the example that I gave at the start, where you can see the power of just investing into the share market overall and the wealth that can create for you, then the question really becomes, how much risk do you really need to get a great results? And it shouldn't be, how do you shoot the lights out and get to where you want to be as quickly as you humanly can and run the risk of failure and setbacks and having to go back to the start, and you've got a more stressful ride along the way? Or do you spread your risk, take the money that's on the table, not having to stress, you can sleep like a baby knowing that your investments are doing what good investments do? Diversification is a really key risk management strategy, and the more investments you can put in a portfolio, the smoother your returns will be over time. Now, another thing, and I touched on this before, but you want to just maximize your tax deductions for people that got employer share plans in place. Knowing what you can be doing to offset the high assessable income that you've got is going to go a long way to saving you pennies at tax time and minimizing that ATO donation. The things that you can do, and there is a limit for PAYG individuals, that there's not a ton of things that you can do legally with your deductions to get more back. But a really critical opportunity for people in that case is when you invest and how you invest and the strategy around investing to minimize your tax. So one thing you can do is super contribution. So individuals can contribute up to 25,000. In fact, they just raised that limit up a bit over 25,000 in each financial year, including what comes in from your employer. So that's an immediate tax deduction. The other advantage of getting money into super is that the maximum tax rate inside super is 15%. So that means that you can really, once the money's in there, it's going to bubble away and grow really quickly. Grow faster for you because it's not subject to as high a rate of tax. The other one is debt recycling. This is really great if you've got if you're a homeowner, that you live in your own home and you've got a mortgage and a bit of equity in your properties, as in like the value of your mortgage is reasonably lower than the value of your home. And how it works is that you basically can because your home mortgage debt is not tax deductible and debt for investment is deductible. And I'll give you this simple example, and don't worry, I'll direct you to how you can learn more about this if you don't fully follow it, because there's a lot of complexity there. But if you say you got a $1 million mortgage and a $500,000 share portfolio with your employer, you get the $500,000, you pay it onto your mortgage reduces to $500,000. Then you have a line of credit, like another debt that you can, of $500,000 that you can take and then reinvest it into the same shares. I can't stress that enough. If that's what you choose to do, not saying that you always would, but doing that. And then because you've borrowed that money to invest, you've now got $500,000 of tax deductible debt and a whole heap of tax deductions, and it can help you pay down your mortgage faster. So really compelling strategy for people in the right situations, and something that can give you tens of thousands of dollars of deduction each year. Negative gearing is another thing that you can do under current rules with buying property. Now that you need to be able to sleep at night, so you want to have a smart strategy around this. But buying property, negatively geared, depreciation, that can all give you tax deductions that you can then leverage to get more deductions. And also you've got, when you negatively gear into property, you've got a big property asset working for you as well. And the last one here is using trusts and investment companies. Now the company tax rate for an investment company is only 30%. So if your marginal tax rate is 47.5%, using a trust and company structure can essentially cap out your tax at 30%, meaning that you're saving tens of thousands of dollars of tax over time, and you build up money in a company and then you pay yourself a salary from there in the future. Again, reasonable level of complexity. So if you think about going down that path, get some good help. But it is a pretty substantial opportunity for people, again, in the right situation. You want to make sure that your employer share plan fits with your broader plan, though. I think that's the key message here, that any one of these moves that I've just touched on, they can all be right or not right for you. Whether they are depends on you, what you want, how your situation is going to change over time, and what's important to you. So instead of just thinking that there's one set of steps that you can follow to get to where you want to be, or one set of money moves or strategies that you can use to, guarantee you become a multimillionaire. Instead, you need to go through a process to figure out exactly what's right for you. And this planning process, this is the process that we guide people through when we help them with their financial planning. But it's the same process that any person should be sort of using, really, if they want to plan with their money. So the first step is getting focused on what's actually important to you. The question that I like to ask to tease this one out is to say, if you were sitting here 3 years from today, for you to be super stoked with everything that's going on with your money, what is it that's important to you? What do you want to see, feel, or have happen? That gives you a bit of a hit list to start working towards. Then from there, you need to clarify all of the moving parts and things that sit underneath your strategy. So, what money's coming in, what money's going out, where's it going? What's your vesting schedule? What does the ESOP look like? What's your gains position on your shares? All of those sorts of things, so that you've got that foundation. And then you want to clarify what we call your lifestyle baseline, where you're looking at, okay, from here, you might be planning time out of the workforce, start family, schooling, childcare costs, all of these things that you want to make sure that you've got the ability to do if you choose to do them, that you need to map those out. So when you layer financial decisions and investment decisions over the top of those, you can make sure that they're consistent. So buying that property, buying an investment property, buying your dream home, starting an investment portfolio, you can then put those on top of your baseline to look at what the impact is. And that's the next step, which is really wrapping it all together into a strategy. Now, this is something that can be challenging. The more stuff you've got going on in your situation can be challenging to do on your own, because like for when we do it for people, we use financial scenario modeling, financial planning software, where you plug in all of the things and you can see what the financial, the cash flow impact, the asset impact is for different scenarios over time. If your situation's simple, you can, and you're good with a spreadsheet, you could potentially look to do it on your own. The more stuff you got going on, though, and especially if you've got an employer share plan and there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of opportunity there, think about getting some good help to tie it all in a bow and make sure that you've giving yourself the confidence that you're doing the right thing and the confidence to be able to pull the trigger and execute on the strategy so that you can start getting the results. Once you've done the strategy, the next step is you want to break it all down into a crystal clear action plan. So you know what the 27 steps are that can take you from where you are to where you want to be. That's your roadmap. Once you've got the plan, you want to automate as much as you can. And it's great to have a great plan and to have it automated, but the execution is where the rubber really hits the road, because we know that the world doesn't work in nice straight lines. So when things change, you need to make sure, and this is where that ongoing action piece comes in, that you need to make sure that your plan remains consistent with what you want and all the things that are important to you and what's happening in financial markets as well. And it is a circular process over time. So that's the approach. I hope that helps. As I say, it's what we do, but it's also everybody basically needs to follow something like that if you want to have a robust strategy. But that is the result, that you've got a clear strategy, you know where you're headed, you know that you've made the most of all of the opportunities that are available to you, and you know exactly what needs to happen, what are the steps that need to happen to turn the great ideas into great outcomes for you. Now, some of the mistakes that people make, this is the last bit I want to go through, is essentially thinking that this stuff is not complicated. Now, it potentially may seem simple, but there's a ton of you probably got an idea from some of the concepts that I've just covered there. There's a lot of complexity, and also there's a lot of things that sit underneath that are sort of hidden unknowns that people aren't aware of when going down this path. So while it's it's not that people think it's simple, but there's that complication there. The other thing is that delaying action, I touched on this before, but delaying action, people think, and especially when it's the curse of having just more and more and more dollars going into your bank account, your investment account over time, that you just put it off for this tomorrow that doesn't come, and you're like, oh, I've got it, yeah, I'll get around to it. No, I can do it myself. Oh, it should be easy. And then just time goes on, life gets in the way, you've got other personal things, family stuff, and you end up missing opportunities to start capitalizing and really building that momentum. I see this a lot, and it's it's frustrating for me to see this because I can see so much potential, but it's just so easy to get caught in that inertia. Ignoring risks, I touched on this before, that involvement bias, thinking that because you're, involved in a company that it's going to do well. Our brains are hardwired to think that, but it doesn't. If the question with employer share plans is, if you had $100,000 and you wanted to invest it, would you put it all into Amazon or Google or whoever it is that you work for? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not the best investment for you. But for some, we get this weird thing going on that because it just happens, then we think that it's the right thing to do. So don't ignore that risk. Thinking that the markets will just continue forever. As I mentioned, I think that there is a decline coming at some point because it just seems unsustainable that the governments just keep printing cash and pumping it into the economy. I don't think that's necessarily going to be in the short term, but we may get some corrections around that. Take advantage and take your profit while you can. Not to say sell everything, but knowing that you've done enough that you can do the other things that you want to let the markets do what they want. For me, I think that just makes a whole ton of sense. And don't make choices in isolation, because when you look at decisions in isolation, you can make things that just don't fit with your broader plan and are great in absolute terms potentially, but terrible when it comes to your overall situation. Taking the wrong advice, people with conflicted agendas, hidden opinions, that sort of stuff. Stay away from those property spruikers that get these massive incentive payments as well. It's something I see quite a lot of. People don't ask enough questions before they dive in. If you're getting someone to help you, if they're getting paid more, whether you invest in shares or property or anything else, then ask that question and why, and really have, clearly you're intelligent to end up in the position that you're in. Apply that intelligence to scrutinizing the people that you work with so you can understand their motivations. Now, when it comes to financial advice, we work on a fixed fee for service basis, like a fixed dollar-based fee. Obviously, I'm totally biased because this is what we do. I obviously think it's the best, which is why we do it. But I think that removes the motivation. It's not like you go to some person that only does share investing and they're going to get paid if you invest in shares, or you go to some property person that gets paid if you get property. And also friends, family, and the armchair economists in the office, generally not the best for advice either. No offense to anyone out there. But again, it's like this, you get this groupthink mentality and you're talking in an echo chamber, and it's just, you want to get some perspective, some outside perspective to make sure that you're making really robust decisions. So guys, next step, and I'll just remind you of the potential impact here as well. I got that example of saving $100,000, what it can do over time, $200,000 or more. So this is why it's important to make this happen. The longer you sit on your hands, the more opportunities that you've missed. And this model sort of talks to that point as well. It talks about your progression from where you are today to some point in the future. And I think a lot of people when they think about their progression from where they are today to this future state, they know that they're going to be somewhere ranging from really bad to really good, but they think that the progression is like a straight line. But because of that compounding impact of time and money that we've just seen in that example, it's actually a curve. And, if you're not quite where you want to be, if you're below the path that you need to be on to end up in the ideal position, there are some things you need to do, right? You need to optimize your tax. You need to do the right thing with your share plan, property strategy, debt strategy, all of those things. You need to do what we call jumping the line. When you jump the line, then you just need to stay on that path and just keep following the bouncing ball, which is much easier. But the more time goes on, if you leave it too long, you can see that the gap between the lines gets bigger, and it becomes more and more difficult to make the sacrifices or the trade-offs that you need to do to get there. It can become painful and in some cases impossible to get to the ideal position that you want to be in. So this is my motivation and pep talk. To say, if you want to, do stuff, then, it's the easiest time is right now. If you want to build a passive income of $10,000 a month, you're going to need to save X dollars today. If you wait a month, a year, 5 years, it's just X plus, 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 plus as the time goes on. So Sooner you get started, the easier it is. I hope that's given you a bit of motivation to get started. I'll leave you with this quote from Derek Sivers, which I love using in my presentation, which says that if information was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs. And I think it's very fitting that it speaks to the point that it's great to have great ideas, but it's action that translates into results, and focused knowledge is the key to taking action. So I hope that you found that helpful. I hope that's given you some ideas to some of the things that you can do to move the dial and to start getting results. Look, guys, this is exactly the stuff that we help people with. I think at least half of the people we work with have some level of employer share plan. So what we're doing for people, if you're in that position, you want to talk about what the opportunities are for you, happy to have a quick chat over the phone. I've got a link here, a bit.ly, so bit.ly/ESS pivot, all one word in lowercase. If you want to have a 10-minute chat with us, talk about what the opportunities are, get a bit of Q&A and understand what some of the possibilities might be for you. No obligation. If we can give you a push in the right direction, we will. If we think that we might be able to help you more, we can talk about what that might look like. Would please would love to have that conversation. We love helping people with this stuff and capitalizing on the opportunities that are there. So I hope you found that helpful. I'm happy to do some Q&A via YouTube if anyone does have any questions. I can see a couple of notes in here. Marissa says, g'day Marissa. YouTube, if anyone. Here we go. Hey, Marissa. And Hamish has asked whether we'll be sharing the PowerPoint after. Yes, we're happy to do that if you're registered via the Eventbrite. And yeah, sorry, I'm a bit new. This is my first time on the YouTube live setup, but if anyone does have any specific questions, please feel free to email them through to us. I hope you guys have found that helpful. I hope it helps you get clear on the opportunities for you. And we'll shoot over a note with those slides, the recording, and some content for you as well. Guys, hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, stay safe.